He was 26 when he rewrote how we understood the brain. He was 26, still, when he skied across Greenland. He was 60 when he brought home 500,000 prisoners of war. And outside Norway, his name rarely comes up. He was born on the 10th of October, 1861, in a farmhouse called Stor Fruin, just north of what was then called Christiania. Today we call that city Oslo. His father, Baldur, was a reporter to the Supreme Court, strict, religious, precise. His mother Adelaide was tall and practical, and was, unusually for a woman of her class at the time, an accomplished skier. She put her son on skis as a small boy. The house sat on the edge of the Nordmarka forest, and he and his brother spent their childhoods disappearing into it. His mother died suddenly in the summer of 1877. He was 15. His father sold the farm, moved the family into Christiania, and young Fridtjof, restless, turned outward, to the ice, to the mountains, to anywhere that wasn't a drawing room. At 20, he took a job that surprised everyone. Not law, not the military. Zoology, at a museum in Bergen, on the west coast. He stayed there for 5 years, bent over a microscope, studying the nervous systems of primitive sea creatures using a new silver staining technique from Italy. What he found is easy to miss in a biography, but it mattered. At the time, scientists believed the brain was a single fused network, a kind of tangled fishing net of nerve fibers, all physically joined. It was called reticular theory. Looking at the cells of sea hagfish and lancelets, Nansen could not find those joints. He thought the nerve cells touched but did not fuse. In December 1887, Bergen Museum published the work. 4 months later, on the 28th of April 1888, he defended it at the Royal Fredericks University in Christiania. He was right. He was 26. The Spanish anatomist Santiago Ramón y Cajal, working independently in Barcelona, would become the name most associated with the neuron doctrine, and would share a Nobel Prize for it. But when the history of neuroscience is written honestly, Nansen is one of the first names on the page. 4 days after defending his thesis, he sailed for Greenland. The plan was considered suicidal. Every previous attempt on the Greenland ice cap had started from the inhabited west coast and turned back. Nansen proposed to start from the uninhabited east coast, with no ship waiting, no shelter, no retreat. It was a deliberate choice. He wanted no way back. On the 15th of August, 1888, he stepped onto the ice with 5 companions: an army lieutenant named Oluf Dietrichson, a sea captain named Otto Sverdrup, a young sailor from Trøndelag called Christian Christiansen Trana, and 2 Sami from the far north, Samuel Balto and Ole Ravna, a reindeer owner from Karasjok. 40 days later, on the 3rd of October, they walked down into a fjord on the west coast. They had crossed Greenland on skis. No one had done it. The scientific world noticed. A year later, in September 1889, he married Eva Sars, a celebrated Norwegian mezzo-soprano, and almost immediately he started planning something bigger. Years earlier, wreckage from an American ship called the Jeannette, lost off the Siberian coast in 1881, had washed up on the opposite side of the Arctic, on the southwest coast of Greenland. A Norwegian meteorologist had argued this could only mean one thing. There was a current flowing right across the Arctic Ocean, carrying the ice with it. Nansen read this as a young man, and he thought, if an ocean can carry ice across the pole, it can carry a ship. He commissioned a vessel from the shipwright Colin Archer. She was called the Fram, Norwegian for forward. Her hull was rounded like a nutshell, so that when the polar ice squeezed her, she would rise up on top of it instead of being crushed. It was, at the time, the strangest looking ship ever built. On the 24th of June, 1893, the Fram sailed for Siberia, was deliberately frozen into the pack ice, and began to drift. For 18 months it worked. The ship moved slowly across the top of the world, but the drift was not carrying them to the pole. So Nansen did something extraordinary. In March 1895, He and one companion, Hjalmar Johansen, stepped off the moving ship with dogs, sledges and kayaks, and set out north across the pack ice on skis. They reached 86 degrees, 14 minutes, the farthest north any human being had been. Then they turned around. What followed was a 15-month retreat across the shifting ice, with no map, no ship, no rescue. They wintered on a tiny island in the Franz Josef archipelago, in a hut of stone roofed with walrus skins, eating polar bear meat and burning its blubber for heat. In June 1896, repairing a kayak on a beach, Nansen thought he heard a dog bark. A British explorer named Frederick Jackson walked out of the fog. Jackson had known Nansen's face from newspapers. He came home a national hero. He used the fame carefully. In 1900 and 1901, he and Eva built a house outside Christiania and called it Polhogda, Polar Heights. He filled it with books. It stood on a low rise above the fjord, and it would be his home for the rest of his life. In 1905, when Norway separated from Sweden, it was Nansen, not a politician, who was sent to Copenhagen to quietly persuade a Danish prince to accept the Norwegian throne. The prince agreed. Norway became a nation. Nansen became its first minister in London. Eva died at Polhogda of pneumonia in December 1907. He had 5 children. He kept working on oceanography. The Nansen bottle, a sampling device he designed in 1894, would be used to measure the world's oceans for the next 70 years. And then, in 1920, the world asked something else of him. The First World War had ended, but roughly 500,000 prisoners of war were still stranded across Russia and Central Asia. Nobody wanted the job. The League of Nations asked Nansen. By September 1921, he had already reported 350,000 home via the Baltic, 12,000 through Vladivostok, 5,000 through the Black Sea. By the time the operation ended, the total was more than 450,000. In 1921, a famine swept the Volga. Up to 30 million people were at risk. Nansen took charge of the relief effort. He was 59, turning 60 that October, and he had never stopped. And then came the problem that defined him. After the Russian Revolution, hundreds of thousands of people had fled and been stripped of their citizenship. They were stateless. They could not legally cross any border. In March 1922, Nansen proposed a simple fix, a travel document, issued by the League of Nations itself, that any country could recognize. By the time it was replaced in 1942, more than 450,000 people had carried one. It was called, without much fuss, the Nansen passport. It is the direct ancestor of every refugee travel document in use today. On the 10th of December 1922, he was given the Nobel Peace Prize. He donated the money to relief work. He died on his balcony at Polhogda on the 13th of May 1930, watching the spring come in. His ashes were buried under a tree in the garden. He had crossed Greenland on skis. He had drifted across the Arctic in a ship built to float on ice. He had, quietly, helped invent modern neuroscience. And in the end, he had done something rarer than any expedition. He had argued to an entire century that a person without a country was still a person. It is the idea we are still, unevenly, trying to live up to. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe for more.